Tonight we're going to continue our work in Chapter 32, and we're going to complete the last two exercises, and that would be exercise 32.3 and 32.5. All right, so 32.3, let's read the description here. It says, develop a subclass of border pane named DB connection pane that enables the user to select a JDBC driver and a URL and to enter a username and password as shown in figure 3228, that would be this one. When the Connect to DB button is clicked, a connection object for the database is stored in the connection property. You can then use the get connection method to return the connection. So if you're thinking about this as to what we're doing, we're really kind of setting up a little program where we're going to feed the information that we have otherwise been hard coding into the database, but we're going to throw it in programmatically. So this would actually be kind of a useful little thing if you were writing a program that needed to connect to a variety of different databases. You could specify the database, and it's just basically it's just a little exercise. So this one actually should be fairly simple to complete. Let's go ahead and jump over to Eclipse and get started with our work. I'm going to create a new class file. We already have a Chapter 32 folder. So I'm creating a new class, and we are going to call it exercise 32_3. We will add a main method, kind of our typical pattern here, and click finish. All right, we're going to leave the main in there. Of course, with the main, we are going to throw in our little launch directive, so let's just do that right away. And of course, launch is underlining because we don't have the library for it, right? That goes with the application library. So when I do my control space, boy, it tries to put in something I don't want. So I think that what we're going to do is we're just going to let it sit there until we add this part. So right with the class name, we're just going to do extends application. And here's where I'm going to do my control space. Pull up the Java FX application import. We are then also going to need to create a primary stage. What I'm of course doing here is I'm copying from myself from my other screen. So I got the stage in here. Once again, you see the stage is underlining. I'm hovering this time instead of control space, so you can see that you can do it that way too. And it says import stage Java FX stage. That's the one I'm going to choose. And I'm going to pause the video while I answer this Hangout call. Okay, so I got interrupted there for a moment, but we managed to pull in the library for the start and for the stage, and you can see that the library is up here. I do need a closing curly bracket there, so I just went ahead and pressed enter, which put it in automatically. All right, other stuff that we know we're going to do, we do it in all the graphical applications as we want their stage and our scene and all that stuff. So I'm just going to one of the previous applications that we built, and I'm just going to copy this part of it. And as I bring these components over, once again we're going to be prompted to add some libraries. Okay. It doesn't like pane because we haven't created one yet, so I'm just going to delete that. All right, and that'll throw an error for now until we add something in. We do want to change this to 32.3. And let's go ahead and save your work so you don't lose what you have so far. The other thing that we should keep an eye on is just the interface itself. Now, if you remember that previous exercise that we did, this one, you'll notice that we have our labels and our fields, and we also have a little status label at the top and a few buttons at the bottom. And really, this is not much different. I mean, it's very comparable. They do have a label up at the top for status. The only thing that's really different here is that they have these drop-down boxes as opposed to regular text fields. So that's going to be, the big new technique that we're using here. All right, so let's start building the visual interface. Now, as usual, we have a number of different ways we can approach the visual interface, right? I think you guys are learning that there's not necessarily a right or a wrong. You can use so many different approaches and still get it to work just fine. And then it becomes either a matter of like what you're comfortable with or what might work best for the scenario. But as is true with many programming endeavors, there's often many ways to accomplish the same thing. So right or wrong, might boil down to what's most efficient. And for the kind of stuff that we're coding here, efficiency isn't really all that huge of an issue, honestly. All right, so one thing that we're going to have to do is kind of read the instructions really carefully, because there's a little twist to this that you might otherwise miss. All right, the part that's important, it says, we're given a little hint here, right? Border pane. It says they want us to develop a subclass of border pane named DB connection pane. Do you guys remember what a subclass is? Yeah, it's like a child class, or a subclass. You got the parent class and subclass. We will inherit from the parent. So if we're creating a subclass, so we're going to develop a subclass of border pane. So we are basically going to extend border pane. That's going to be our parent element, and we're going to need to kind of build that stuff out. So what I'm looking at right now, and I'm on my second screen here, which you guys can't see, is I'm looking at a previous solution. And there's a couple different approaches to this, really, because we can, and our habit has been, like in previous classes, that we create our class files separately. And a lot of what this author does, and a lot of programmers do, is they'll bundle some of those classes directly within the application just to not have separate files. And that's the technique I'm going to use here. And this little tip tells us a lot. So what it tells us is that we do have to write something that says DB connection pane extends border pane. So right away we kind of know that we're using a border pane as one of our things, or one of our graphical elements. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to just, at the very bottom of the file, and it has to be actually below the last curly bracket, because this is one class. So we're going to create a brand new class inside here. And in fact, I'm not even going to declare it public or private, because it sits internal to the program. All right, I'm going to just build, and then you guys will see what I mean. So they want us to call this DB connection pane. DB connection pane. That extends border pane. Now, border pane does require a library. So you see how it's underlined? We're just going to hover, and I'm going to choose the first option. Remember, we're always looking for the thing that's got the Java effects in it, because that's the approach we're using. All right, so our library's been added. One thing that we're going to need to do, remember, this is basically it's a class file that sits internal to another class, but we are going to have to create some private data fields and some methods that go with the class in order to be able to use its features. One thing that we're going to want to do for sure, and we did this before, is we are going to create a private, and we'll create a label, and that label, we're going to name it LBL status. And just like we did last time, we're just going to use that to propagate messages. So we do have the option right now to be able to populate it with text right off the bat. And for right now, you know what I'm going to put in there? I'm just going to put in some question marks because I do have a little bit of a preconception as to what might go in there. Label is underlining, so let's hover once again and pull in the JavaFX library. Then we're also going to need a few other privates. Now, before I take us too far down this path, I want you guys to think kind of carefully about this, because in the previous exercise, 32.1, we created a little method called initialize database, right? And that was the part that connected us to the database. But our objective here is to actually select from a drop-down box the connection to the database. So, I'm sorry? Or let the user enter it if they know the database server name. So, you have to kind of know what those things are. But if you're comparing it to what we've done before, what we're really saying is some of this stuff that's hard-coded, we're going to be passing this information in. So really what's going to happen is we're going to throw in variables in place of some of the hard-coded values. So if you look back at the book again, I mean, username and password, those are going to be variables, right? The connection string, that's going to be a variable too. All right, I already see you guys aren't feeling very comfortable with this. All right, the other thing I want you to keep in mind is we're creating database connection pane which extends border pane. So we know what border pane is, right? It's one of these constructs that has a top, right, bottom, left, and then a center, and you can push content into any one of those areas. So if we're creating a DB connection pane that extends it, we are basically saying we're creating the border pane here in this class, and we really don't need to do it up here. Okay, so knowing that we're not going to do it up here, knowing already what it's called, I'm actually going to copy this, and I'm just going to paste it right in here. However, okay, and here's the however. That would work if it was already instantiated. So the class file that we're making down here is a class file. It's not an object. We have to instantiate the object. So I could do that separately. I could actually, you know, do like a, I could do a statement like this: DB connection pane, give it a name. I can say new DB connection pane, that whole routine, right? That's one thing I could do. But, and that's kind of a lot of code, when I can actually just do it right in position. So right inside the scene parameters, I can instantiate on the fly without giving it a name, because we have to do it anyhow. So it creates the object as it's needed, and then we're just going to throw it in there. Now, when I do a new declaration, of course, this, you know, being a class, is going to have a constructor, so I need to put the parentheses after it. And then, of course, if you remember how these scenes work, we're going to have to still put in the size parameters. So, Chris, you're usually pretty good at figuring out the ratios. What did 410 and 180 is what Chris came up with. He's really good at figuring out how big the boxes should be, basically. Otherwise, we look at it, we just make a guess. Well, it's wider than it is tall, so the width is going to be wide, and that's in pixels. All those measurements are in pixels. All right, so we're going to take Chris's word for it. Now, believe it or not, our start method here is done. right? And this is the leap that's difficult, I think, for most of you, and where you probably got stuck if you got stuck on this assignment. All right, so this is the main body of the program. Really all we're doing is we're creating the scene, the stage, and we're showing it, and we're instantiating on the fly a new DB connection pane. So all the visual elements that we're going to create are going to be in that class file. Now, you might be asking yourself, why go to all that trouble? Well, the reason why is when you have the class pre-created that generates both the visual interface and the connection, we can pick that up and drop it into any program. We can take that class file, set it off to the side, and then we just call in a DB connection pane, and it'll bring up that interface and the connection capability. So you see the advantage of that? A lot of the stuff that we've done in the past where we like instantiate a parent element, right, where we draw from something, or then we create an object, it's been pretty simplistic. In this case, we're not only doing, like creating a horse, I don't know if you remember that, we did like race horse back in Java 1. Here we're creating a database connection on the fly and the visual interface that goes with it. So what that allows us to do is if we're writing a larger application, and that's kind of the takeaway here as well, is that by just very simply having pre-created this, and once again you can do it as a separate file, this simple little command will bring in that whole thing, the interface and the capability to connect to the database. It's a powerful thing. It really simplifies our work for us. All right. Yes, Cindy Lou. Well, that's an excellent question. All right. So if I do it this way, which is the way that you're suggesting, or the way that you did it, all I have to put here is the name. So all I would have to say is DB Connect pane. Okay, so why? Yeah, that's a great question. So why don't I have to give it a name? It's because I'm just doing it. Have you taken any JavaScript classes? Okay. In JavaScript, a real common technique is that we sometimes just brute force run a function because the function is only going to operate under a given scenario. It's not going to be something that we call. It's something that the situation dictates. So we might just need to do something, we just do it. Doesn't really matter if we do it again because it's not going to happen. It's not going to be something that we're going to use independently. I mean, if you did want to use it independently and do instantiate many versions of this, that is the approach you would want to use. You would want to do something like this. And honestly, we can still do it this way if you want. If you're more comfortable with that, I can do it this way. I mean, basically, it's a conscious choice, and it's also kind of, we did this last time too. Remember when we were looking at the labels in exercise 32.1? And in 32.1, I showed you that you can pre-create the labels, or if you want, you can generate it on the fly. You just throw it in. You don't even give it a name. It just creates itself. And that's okay if you don't plan on ever calling it by name. And in this case, I don't need to call it by name because the whole reason the program exists is to run that border pane. Well, okay, well, I guess I would qualify that. If you're going to instantiate this twice within an application, hmm yes, yes, absolutely. Okay, and the question was, and I'm sure the people listening to the video aren't hearing it, is if this class that we're creating down here that's incomplete right now, if we did have that as a separate file, could I still instantiate it on the fly? Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's just that, people that get into higher levels of programming are always looking at to find more efficient ways to do something, and then you recognize I don't really need to give it a name because I'm just going to do it. And that's really the mindset. And for new programmers, it's kind of like a fuzzy concept. And usually you learn this in JavaScript first, because JavaScript is one of those languages that lends itself well to like anonymous functions. The language is set up to do it. And here we're basically doing the same thing through the process of instantiation. And what is unbeknownst to most people is when you do JavaScript, you're really doing the same thing. You're just not using the new keyword in the mix. You're just doing it, right? Because it's not a formally object-oriented program by nature. We trick it into being one. Okay, so, but I am talking about JavaScript here, not Java. So that's that famous talk too. All right. So one thing that we are going to do is we're going to also go back and look at some of the stuff that we have here, right? And this is our previous exercise because we still need to do some of this stuff. So for example, we are going to need to get a connection going. But we should already recognize, though, that this part of it is not something that we're going to do. And this part of it really is part of this method. So it attaches to the library driver manager, get connection, and we throw these parameters. But what I do need to do is I do need to create connection called probably connection. So let's just do that. This is going to go into the private class again. So I'm going to jump down here, and we're going to do a private, and we'll call it connection. And let's just call it connection because that's what we've been doing. And I don't need to give it any values because we're going to do that later, right? I'm just creating the variable. Just creating actually I'm instantiating the object. I'm getting ready to instantiate it. I'm trying to think of the right words here. Now we also need to pull in the library, and that's going to come in here with Java SQL. And if we think of other things that we would add, like think of when we were building our application before, in the previous application, and how we went through in this one, and see all the privates that we created, all the labels, the buttons, the text fields. We got to do that too. I know you guys are excited. All right. I know we're going to need a button, right? Because the book shows that we need one button. That's easy. Let's do that. Get all the easy stuff done first. So let's create a private button. That also needs a library. Let's hover. Oh, I don't have them. Okay. They want me to name it first. So what are we going to call it? Connect? Well, it's going to be our only button, right? Let's just call it button. Is that too easy? All right. All right.
We could call it connection button.
We could. That's just a whole lot of text, though. All right, we'll call it connection button. Or how about let's call it connect button. All right, now you guys are getting way too formal. Fine. BTN connect. See what I have to put up with here, you guys listening to the video? And this is going to be a new button. Do we want to feed it any information? Suggestions. Well, the book says connect to DB, so let's do what the book says. Connect to DB. Now we can add our library. Just do a little hover there. So JavaFX scene control. All right. What else? We're going to need a text field. And then we're going to need some labels too. All right, let's go ahead and create text field. What do we want to call this? This one's going to be for, so what I'm creating right now is these two boxes, these two text boxes. So the first one's going to be for username. So txt user, that works for me. And we want to pass any parameters? Nah, it's empty box, right? Do you need the library? Let's hover. Now, I don't know if you guys read about this when you were reading about controls, but you know, we could add another text field, but they also have one that's specially designed for passwords. Same kind of thing we do in HTML5, where they have input type password, and basically what it does for us automatically is when we type in it, it obscures the letters, so we don't have to write code to do it. So I strongly suggest we do the same here. So we're going to do password field is the title of it, and let's just call it, can we just call it like PWD? And we will say new password field. Once again, we don't have to put anything in there. We're going to hover and create it. All right, so we got a button, we got the two text fields, but now what about, well, okay, another thing we're going to need is we probably want to, no, we already did that, didn't we? I was thinking we need a label to put the status in that we're going to put up at the top, but that's done already. Now we need to create this other weird thing, these drop-down boxes. Do you guys remember what they call these drop-down boxes? Combo box. Right on. All right, so these work a little bit differently. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set up the structure. And I want you guys to kind of follow along. We're going to need two of them. One is going to be for the JDBC driver, technically, and then the database URL. So not only do we have to create the box, we also have to create the stuff that's going to go inside the box as an option. So it's going to be kind of a combination approach here. So let's type it in. We're going to create another private. It's going to be a combo box. Now, because a combo box operates with a array, basically, or a list, really, an array list, technically, we do need to have a data type that we're going to throw in there, and it's going to be a string, right? Because the connection string will probably be a string. And then we need to give this a name. So the book, well, one is for driver and one is for URL. Maybe those are adequate names. Yeah, let's name it lowercase, or we'll call it, one is the driver, and then we're going to say new combo box. Now, because we're using an array list here, we don't use parentheses, we use brackets, like the regular, like the ones that we'd use to create an HTML tag. All right, and then we're going to throw in our curlies, because there's parameters going in here. And I'm sorry, not quite yet. I'm jumping the gun here a little bit. I don't want curlies. I apologize. What I do want is I have to pass in some parameters now. So attached to this, I'm going to start parentheses, and inside the parentheses, we're going to add some stuff. The first thing that we're going to add is a call to JavaFX library that's going to allow us to pull in the list. The command, it's an obscure one. You can probably only get it from your readings or research. Observable array list. That's the one we want. And notice that one also has a set of parentheses, and it's inside these parentheses that we're going to put all the parameters in that we want. All right. So given our previous application connecting to the database, this is the connection string that we used, right? I'm not worried about username and password, mind you, just database. And actually, I do, because this is going to be a string, I do need the quotes to come with. So I'm just going to copy it from here. I'm just going to paste it in. Now all the stuff that goes into this array list needs to be separated, so we're going to use commas to do that. And then what the book has is an example, and I encourage you guys to just copy these if you want. It doesn't matter if you're precise with it or not, because frankly we don't have the capability of connecting to these types of databases. But what they're really doing is they're giving us an option of connecting to 3 different databases. Now, I'm not running a Microsoft database and I'm not running an Oracle database. Now, if we did have databases like that available to us, we could, hypothetically, with this connection string, connect to any one of those types of databases. Don't worry about getting the syntax correct. You could type in, you know, Cubs win if you want, and that would be fine. If you want to make it look more official, you can put these in.
Sorry, so this is just your path?
No, this is the database connection driver string. So we're connecting to MySQL on Kronos, and this is the string that we use to do that. That loads up the right driver and makes it work. Okay. Now, the other thing you want to keep in mind, even though we're putting in these extra connections, if I was actually planning on using those connections in these libraries that we added, remember we added the MySQL connector, I would also have to add the ODBC and the Oracle connector in there as well. In fact, it might even throw an error. We'll find out when we're trying to compile. Right now it's not underlining, so it might not really care. Like PHP? Is that what you're thinking, where you do a connection? Yeah, I mean, it's basically the same thing. You're just using the convention of this language in order to connect to the server that holds the database, and then to also load the correct driver to do it. So this is... Oh, yeah, that's a different thing. Yeah, what you're thinking of is the object notation. So she's thinking JSON, basically. But yeah, the syntax isn't too far off. It's really just, it's a list. It's, you know, it's basically an array. Now, I know that we're going to need to add this library here, so let's do that right away. And then we're also going to need to create another combo box. Once again, it's going to be a private Oh, you know what? And I messed up here, folks. I shouldn't even tell you that. This is exactly how it should be. I'm going to drop it down here and let it throw all the errors it wants. But I need the drivers here. The other ones are the connection strings. So sorry, that wasn't the right thing to put there. What we do want to put there is something that looks more like this. And I apologize. for all the copy pasting you guys are doing right now. But what we do want in there is this information. These are the drivers. Now, we have a little bit of, difference there because these are the connection strings, these are the drivers. Okay, so I apologize for that little bit of confusion there. This combo box is going to kind of be put together just like the previous one. Previous one was called driver, and this one is database URL basically. So I don't know what you want to call it. Yeah, let's call it URL. And this is going to be new combo box. Once again, we got our brackets in there, parentheses. Inside those parentheses, once again, we're going to pull that same library. And now the stuff that I cut out before, I'm going to pull back up into this spot. So there's the strings, the URLs, if you will. You need a closing parenthesis and a semicolon. So these are all visual elements. All this stuff is all visual elements. But the combo box, we're also feeding selections into those boxes. All right. As with any class file, a constructor is required. Okay, so we need to have a way to instantiate it. And the way, if you remember, the way you instantiate an object, first of all, we're going to set a method that's going to be the constructor method, and that needs to be public so it's accessible outside of this class. And that one's going to be called the same thing that we've called our class, which is DB connection pane. Get some curlies in there. Oh, we got to spell it right though. Typos are not allowed. Now, we got our driver and we have our URL. Now what we need to do is we need to get it so that we can edit those components. We need to be able to basically pass values from our form to the application as we're instantiating. You see the way I'm saying that? All right. In order to be able to utilize, these are visual elements. They're visual elements that have options. All right. But when I'm going to be utilizing any one of these bits of information, so I'm going to hit the drop-down box and I'm going to pick one of these. I need to be able to make sure that that content is going to be instantiated. So, in other words, okay, I'll say it a different way. We create the object, the border pane. It's going to have all database connection stuff in it. It's going to have all the visual elements in it. And it's also going to have the visual elements options like this. In order to be able to change the value of it, we have to run a method called setEditable. Okay. And let me just put them in place and then I'll hopefully explain it a little better. All right, so we have our driver. That needs to be set editable. And we need to set it to true. So spell it right. Same thing is the case with the URL. I mean, for me, the simplest way to think of this is we're creating this field, but it has to be changeable, basically. And because these have selections, we need to be able to allow it to be able to switch selections. I mean, that's the best way to do it. I mean, to say it. But the reason we're doing that is to allow for that capability of selecting. That's all. All right. We are also going to need to actually have a spot to put things, right? Once again, I'm thinking visual elements. So as we instantiate this, we need to take all the visual elements that we've created and put them into a pane of some sort. Does anybody have any thoughts as to what kind of pane we should use? I'm looking at Chris, because Chris, you probably already figured out. What did you use? A grid pane. Yeah, and that's exactly what I've done in the past too. That's what the author's done in the past. And the reason I use the grid pane, I mean, that's not really much of a grid. Yeah, I mean, it keeps things in order, right, kind of automatically. So let's do that. I'll start to code it. You'll see where we're going with it. So I'm going to create a grid pane. We will need to add a library. And if you just want to call it grid pane, that's fine. We don't need to pass anything to it. We do need to add the library, so we're going to do a hover, add the layout. And now we can use that grid pane that we created to start putting stuff on the screen. Now, the grid pane, by default, and I don't know if I've ever done this with you guys. I'm going to bring up Excel here for a second. So here's Excel. And those of you that have been with me before probably know exactly what I'm doing. When you're doing a grid pane, all the grid has index numbers basically, right? So 0, all right. So these are my index values, but really the grid itself is here. So I'm just going to colorize it somehow. So each one of these positions then, this position is 0, 0. Then what's this one? 0, 1 or 1, 0? 1, 0, Chris says. If it goes wrong, we blame Chris. I'm going to center everything here. All right. Columns and then rows, you say. So you see what the pattern is now, right? All right. So therefore, this one's going to be 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, etc. All right. So that's just so we know where to put things. So when we're going to start putting stuff into this grid pane, we kind of got to keep that approach in mind. And what I'm going to do, and you might not be comfortable with this either. If you were a little uncomfortable with this instantiate on the fly, I'm doing the same thing, but this time I'm forcing the labels in. And this is the technique I talked about last time. I didn't actually employ it, but I talked about it. But this is a great use of it because really, once you're creating the visual interface, you're putting the label on the screen. You don't ever really need to call it again. You just push it out there and you're done. Okay. So, all right. So, what are some of the labels that we're going to add here? Yep, JDBC driver. And that's in double quotes. And then in addition, we're going to have some other parameters. So This whole declaration here is the first parameter. What are we adding to the grid pane? That's what we're adding, a new label that says this. And then we need to put a position on it, so I'm just going to go with 0, 0. All right. That means that our grid is starting here. This is where the grid pane starts. Got that? Not X and Y. This is why I was doing this grid here. So what would be the value here? And all these indicate is the rows and column numbers. And here it's not pixels in our program. It just shows where on the grid we're placing something. All right. All right, so we're going to continue this process now. In fact, if you want to save yourself a little bit of time, you could do something like copy this whole line. And let's see, the next one will probably be database URL. And we'll put that in 0, 1. Then we can do one for username. And I'll put that in 0, 2. And the reason, okay, so why 0, 1, 0, 2? Look at the Excel chart. Those are the things that go down the side. This one is password. That's going to go in 0, 3. The next thing we're going to need to put in there, so we have these 4 put in. Now we need to put in the 4 boxes. So we're putting in combo box, text field, password field. And in this case, there's not going to be any labels. We're still going to have index values. So what's going to go in the first one? Right, driver. And you said 1, 0? Sounds good to me. All right, let's copy this one. Well, I have a different thought for that. Yeah, I mean, John, we absolutely could do it that way. The question was, if you can't hear it in the video, why aren't we putting the status label in 0, 0? We could, frankly. But I'm going to use a different approach. So if you did it that way, that's not a problem. It'll work. So we got the driver, we got the URL, then we're going to put in txt user. And that's going to go in position 1, 1. And then it's going to be PWD for password. That's going to go to 1, 2. What about that button? You can do it that way too. Somebody said they just put it into an H box. I'm just going to keep going with the grid. I'm going to put it into 1. Oh yeah, that's right. This should be 1, 1. That should be 1, 2. That should be 1, 3. And then I'm going to put button connect in 1, 4, leaving 0, 4 empty. All right, the other thing I'm going to do with this grid pane is I am going to say that we need some sort of an alignment here. And I'm going to do a horizontal alignment. You guys may not have used this one before. And what I'm going to put in there is the BTN. Yeah, it's set H alignment, horizontal alignment. So what I'm throwing in there is the BTN connect button and horizontal position right. That's how I'm going to get it to right justify. Okay, this one apparently needs a library. Let's hover. Java FX geometry. Just check to see it's all jumping in there correctly. That looks fine. All right, this one is flagging a problem here. Oh, okay. I might have to make a tweak here. I'm just going to make a note. Might need to tweak with Superclass. So right now I'm attributing it to the grid pane that I've instantiated, but I might actually have to apply it to the Superclass. I'll find out in a second. We'll see if it works, it works. Otherwise, I'll take this other approach. One other thing that we're going to obviously need is we're throwing a button out there, right? That button needs to be clickable. So we're going to need to do something like this. BTN connect, and then we're going to call our event handler with a lambda expression. And what are we going to run with that? What's going to happen when we click the button? Well, the button says connect database, right? All right. Well, that's what we're going to do. So really what we're going to do is we're going to call a method. We haven't created it yet. But that's okay that we could name it right here. So I could say connect DB. Does that work for you guys? And because it's going to be a method, we'll give it 2 parentheses. And that's probably about all we need. Now it's recognizing that we don't have that yet. So notice a little thing that it auto-generates for us. It says create method connect DB. Let's do it. All right, there it is. Now, I'm not very comfortable with the syntax that they're using here. In fact, it's often what happens when you let it auto-instantiate. So I'm actually going to switch this to a void. I'm not going to return null. I'm actually going to do something with it, so that's going to go away too. Excuse me. All right, so now we're going to need to write this method. We do have a couple of other issues though. And this is layout issues. Now watch this like different technique, folks. When I'm saying this in this context, it's hard to say even. Right now we're working inside the constructor function for this connection pane, right? When I'm referring to this, what am I referring to? Whatever object I'm instantiating. The reason we use this is because I really don't want to attach it to anything specific. Anything that instantiates from this will refer to itself. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to take that status label, and I don't know if this makes sense to you, and you're going to see the connection come together now. Did I call it label status? Is that right? Okay. Okay, it took a second to color code, but yeah, that's right. And then I'm also, once again, self-referring, and then I'm going to see if you guys can put the pieces together as I'm doing this. So the whole reason we did an extends border pane really is because we're going to use border pane really as the master element to hold everything. But in the interim, we decided to use a grid pane to hold the labels and the fields, right? And the button. However, the border pane is still there. So what I'm doing is I'm setting that status label to the top. I'm setting the grid pane to the center. I'm not declaring a left and right and bottom. So you see the technique? Okay. So that's just so that we can get everything on the screen. All right. Now we need to write this method. So let's go ahead and do that. And actually, you know what? I'm looking at the clock right now. Why don't we take a quick break and we'll come back and keep working on this. All right. Now we're back from our break. And we're just getting ready to move along. We had a couple of discussions about football and which panes to use. But we're back on track. We're going to write this method here. What we're going to need to do is we are going to need to set up some variables inside of here, basically to hold the stuff that's going to be put into the form. So we are going to want a string for, okay, now I'm tempted to call it driver. Let's just call it DB driver. And where are we going to get that value from? From the combo box. So the combo box is called driver, and then we're going to run the method called getValue. And so whatever's in that combo box is going to be populating that variable. Same thing for the URL. So I'm just going to call it DB URL. And that one, that combo box was just called URL. Once again, getValue. We also need something for the username. And what did we call it before? Text user. I just want to make sure I don't, I don't want to call it something that doesn't make sense. And we're getting that from txt user. Once again, getValue. Or, no, actually, we don't want to do getValue. We want to do getText. And then that's a method. And then we're going to do that trim. Remember what trim does? Removes leading and trailing spaces. So basically make sure that it's clean coming in. We also need to grab the password. I guess I'll just spell out password in this situation. That one was called PWD. And what do we do with that one? That one, all right, we got to think about that. Yeah. Say that again, Chris. The computer is. You're right. We will do get text. However, there might be a little bit of a complication with that, and I'm going to just put a note here. Well, see, the thing is, when you're working with a password field, on some systems, spaces are okay in a password. Do you know that? On some systems, you can just press the enter key for a password and it works. So who's to say what's right or wrong? So it's not going to be trimmed. Figure if somebody's putting in a space, they mean to put in a space. I'm going to Because, yeah, the question was when we're working with the combo boxes, do we have to do a loop or anything? And the question's no, because even though this is basically part of an array list, we're going to select one. So once it's selected by hitting that drop-down box, this is what's going to come back. Because the values are preset. So that's going to be the only possibility. Yes. Yes. If they wanted to manually enter something, they could. And then we would grab that value. So whatever ends up visible in the box is what's going to get passed. That's how the combo box works. All right. Now the reason I'm doing possibly needs a tweak here, when you're pulling in a password field, what happens to the text? Yeah, it gets changed. No, there's actually a separate way to do it. Basically, you just create a new string that's populated with the result of pulling this back. That's the technique. So I guess not possibly needs a tweak. It did need a tweak, and I just gave you the answer to it. All right. Basically the crux of this is with that password field, because we're using an input or control of type password field, when you type in a value, it changes what you type into non-readable characters. If I just do a get text, it's going to grab the non-readable characters. So we're converting what we're typing into a string and then pulling that in to the other string. It's just, just a little shenanigans to kind of make sure it works. All right. All right, so we got our fields. Now I'm going to go back to our previous applications. I'm going to do a Control S to save, by the way. That's a lot of stuff typed in without saving. And I'm looking at our database initialization, because that's really what comes next. The big difference is basically that we're not hard coding the connection stuff. We're just throwing in variables. So I'm actually going to copy all of this. I'm going to paste it over, and then I'm going to tweak it. No reason to type from scratch. All right. So we're still going to do class for name, but we're going to pass in a value. What value are we passing in? Yep, the DB driver. All right. I could still do a system out print line to the console, driver loaded. Sure, why not? We're still going to have to set our connection equal to something. Did we set up a connection variable? Yep, so it's just called connection. So really all we need to do, we don't have to instantiate it. We're just going to say connection equals. We're still going to have the driver manager and the get connection. And then it drops into a method where we're passing stuff. And we're going to still pass 3 parameters. And the first one's going to be the database URL, that's correct. And then username and password. It's really the same information, it's just now we're throwing variables in there. And because those are nice and concise, I can actually pull that line up here so it's a little easier to read. Once again, we'll leave the system out print line in there. Database connected. We have our label status text. Is that going to be okay? Is that what we called it here? Label status? That'll be fine. So I have a console message and a screen message. We're not really worried about running a query, right? That's what this was about. So I'm just going to get rid of that. In our catch, probably do pretty much the same type of thing here. We'll output to the console. We can throw a little message up in the connection and the exception message. That's what the EX is. That's fine. So you see, it didn't really take a lot of tweaking to make this work. Just getting the variables in the right place. All right. One thing that we do need to do, though, when we're running the application and we're trying to actually make the connection do something, we're going to actually set up a little method. It'll just be one simple line of code inside of this. And I'm just going to call it get connection. You guys can just copy this one. And all we're going to do here is return connection. All right, so from a conceptual standpoint, yeah, let me do this part first. We'll look at it and then fix it, Chris. So this little command will be able to basically send back the connection to the main program. That's all that's going to do. All right, and the thing that Chris was just talking about in the background, if you video people can hear it, is this one's still underlining, and it has actually a suggested fix, which is the right fix. What it's telling me is I can't directly apply this styling method to something that I created manually. So it needs to be applied to the superclass. And that, I knew that in advance, and that's why I put that note in there. So you can see where it says change access to static using grid pane declaring type. So you see what it did? It just changed this to a capital G, so it applies to the superclass and therefore will work. All right, so I'm going to get rid of that comment then. I think we're just about done, if not done. I'm just kind of scrolling back through. We're not going to need this little snippet of code here. May as well delete it. We can even try to be really efficient with the layout here. All right, so there's the main body of our application, the start method, the main method, the external class, which extends border pane. So it's both a visual element and it does stuff. I think we're okay. Let's go ahead and save this, and let's be brave and run it, and hopefully it'll just work. I said hopefully. All right, I see my 3 question marks here. That can certainly be fixed. You could also very easily add a little spacing around all of these objects. But for right now, let's just try to get a connection going to our database. So we have our 3 selections, so we can do our MySQL. That's the only one that's really going to work for us anyhow. Then we need to put in the URL. I have it pre-configured to Kronos and to my database. I'm going to put in my username and my password. I'm crossing my fingers. It says database connected. So it worked. All right. Well, this is, I'm looking at this as a success at this point. And what I'm going to do very quickly for those of you at home copying code. All right. Top part of the code, press pause. Copy. Okay, unpause. Next little bit of code.
But they have to put their own database connection in that. So.
That's correct. You do have to have the database pre-created, and you have to have, you have to make sure it works. But we've kind of done that in these earlier exercises. Remember, we did the simple JDBC thing where we just got it to work. Then we built something a little bit more complicated where we were actually doing SQL queries with it. And now in this latest one, we are just putting together a little dialogue that's doing a connection on the fly. If we did have other database servers available to us, and for all I know, like the networking and CSS people might have databases and, in an ideal world, we'd have accounts there, and we could try connecting to those too. But if you wanted, you should be able here to come in here and choose the driver, choose the database URL, and if necessary, change it to be yours. Like, actually, I have a database that's just called that. And gosh, what the heck is my password? Not for that account. Let's see if that works. All right, so that access denied, that's not the right password. I don't remember what the password is on that. All right, so, but if I did have the right, I'm sorry, go ahead, Nick.
Okay. So with your, since we're away from the campus, we need to be connected.
Oh, excellent point. If you are off campus connecting to the database, you must establish a VPN connection first.
Okay, thank you.
And those of you that always work off campus probably already know that. But if you're trying and trying and trying and it just doesn't work, yeah. Yeah, it could be permissions too. I mean, I was pretty sure I had a database here. You know, actually, chances are I probably have like a WordPress database that I probably can connect to. But then once again, I need to remember the password. Oh. Yeah. Well, if I knew what it was, it would work. All right, that ends this video.